Pretoria, South Africa. The day has just shifted from the 13th of February to the 14th and become Valentine's Day. The year is 2013. The police officers get out of their car and take a quick look at the house they've been called to. It looks dark, except a little light on the second floor. There's no movements, no sound. The house is in a gated community behind high fences, measures taken to keep criminals away. And yet, they've been called to this house because someone has been shot. They look at each other, they have the same uncertain look on their face. They only have to knock once before they are let in by the house owner. If it weren't for the prosthetics he's wearing, they would never have recognized him because he looks like a mess. Big red swollen eyes, snot dripping from his nose, and he has the look of terror on his face, a look they've come accustomed to. They introduce themselves. He doesn't say anything. He just gestures with his arm in what direction to go. He's walking in front of them, walking slowly, with his head hanging low. They glance at each other. They both know that this isn't their ordinary burglary gone wrong. Their gut feeling is telling them that something else, completely different, has happened here. Their suspicion is confirmed by what the house owner is saying while he's sobbing. "I didn't know. I thought it was a burglar. Oh my God, what have I done?" A small light guides them to the room where it all went down, because the house owner isn't capable of walking with them the whole way. He just can't. He stops in the bedroom as the police officers walk past him, turn to the left, and head towards the bathroom area where the light is coming from. There they see the toilet door, 4 bullet holes in the door and a foot belonging to someone lying on the toilet floor. They still hear the house owner saying the same words. "It was a mistake. I thought it was a burglar." But this time, he is screaming and crying at the same time, sounds coming from him that can only be likened to the sounds coming from a wounded animal. They push the toilet door open, and there they see the dead body of a young woman. It is Reeva Steenkamp. She had just been shot dead by her boyfriend, Oscar Pistorius, a 6-time Paralympic gold medalist. This is the unlikely and tragic story of how the Blade Runner became the Blade Gunner. Chapter 1. Oscar. Oscar was born on 22nd of November 1986, which means he turns 38 in 2024. When he was born, both of his feet and his legs under his knees were deformed because he had no fibulas. When he was 11 months old, both his feet and the lowest parts of his lower legs were amputated. So when Oscar learned how to walk, he was walking on prosthetics. Actually, 6 months after the amputation, he had already learned how to walk. Growing up, he showed a huge interest in sports, and him having no lower parts of his legs didn't slow him down or having him sit as a bystander watching others do what he loved. No, he did what he loved to do. He got involved in cricket, boxing, and wrestling, but mostly rugby, a sport that he would be dedicated to until he was 16 years old. He had to stop rugby due to a serious knee injury, but again, being injured wasn't a stop sign. He just didn't see obstacles or difficulties as such. At 16 years old, he would be introduced to the sport that would change his life and the cinematic of South African sports. He was introduced to track. Very soon after he started training sprinting, he wanted to compete. That was the best way for him to see if he was good enough, to see his progress, and to develop a hunger to thrive and to strive after perfection, to go so far beyond his limits that he could barely even see them. And that's exactly what he did. About a year after he started running track, Oscar competed in the 2004 Athens Paralympics. 3 months before the competition started, he was given what would become his strongest signum, something that would become so tightly connected with his name that the two of them would become synonymous. He was given a pair of flex foot cheetahs, a lightweight carbon fiber foot. With them on, he won the gold medal in the 200-meter race. Oscar didn't just compete in the Paralympics or only against other disabled athletes. He also competed against able-bodied athletes. In 2012, Oscar realized his ultimate dream when he qualified for the 400-meter race at the London Olympics. Even though he would be eliminated in the semi-final round, he had written history in being the first amputee athlete to compete in track events at the Olympics. Oscar Pistorius would garner many nicknames in the media. He would be called the fastest man on no legs, half man, half machine, but no other nickname would be as cemented as Blade Runner. He would win 6 Paralympics gold medals and become world famous. He was one of the most famous individuals in South Africa in all categories. If you're lucky, you'll become famous in your field. If you're really lucky, you will become so successful that your name will be synonymous with the field you're in. And if you're really, really lucky, your name will be remembered far outside your own field when you're gone. This is the direction Oscar was heading towards, but instead he became infamous. Chapter 2: Oscar and Reeva. November 4th, 2012. That was the first time Oscar met Reeva. It was at a lunch where Oscar was meeting up with his friend Justin, and Justin had brought Reeva with him. And according to Oscar, him and Reeva really hit it off. During the lunch, Oscar mentioned to Justin that he was invited to the South African Sports Awards that day, and that he had forgotten that he had actually RSVP'd them to come with a +1, and he didn't have a +1. Justin suggests that he asks Reeva to come with him. Oscar never thought Reeva would agree to that on such a short notice, but he had nothing to lose asking her, and Reeva said yes. They were famously photographed together on the red carpet, and they just had a blast and would end up speaking until late that evening. The next day, Oscar asked her out for a coffee, and they would see each other every day for the next 6 days. They would spend that Christmas together with some other friends, but it wasn't until January 2013 that things were starting to pick up between them, as a couple. She started to spend more and more time at his place. They were hanging out a lot, getting to know each other in between both of their schedules, taking them to other parts of South Africa or the world. And because they were a couple, they of course planned to spend Valentine's Day together, and Reeva had prepared a surprise for Oscar. She had written him a letter, a Valentine's card. What was written in it will later be used as evidence in the trial. I will get to this card later. Around 3 o'clock in the morning on February 14th, Reeva was shot dead in Oscar's house, with Oscar being the one who held the weapon, who fired the weapon, and he would be the only one who could tell Reeva's family and the rest of the world what had happened. Well, actually, his version of the events on what would be known as Deadly Valentine's Day would find strong competition in the version the prosecutor would give. Because on February 15th, just 1 day after the tragic event, Oscar Pistorius was charged with premeditated murder. Chapter 3: The Trial. March 3rd, 2014 is the first day of the trial. It's one of those days when everyone can sense that all of the world's attention is pointed in one direction, towards the High Court of South Africa in Pretoria. Not only is the entire site filled with journalists from around the world competing with each other of getting the first words from Reeva's family or the juiciest parts of the trial out to the rest of the world, the whole trial would actually be broadcast live via audio, with big parts of it also broadcasted live via television. Reeva's family chooses to attend the trial, and on the first day, her mother tells a journalist that Reeva had come to her in a dream that same night, telling her that what Oscar will be saying in the court is all a lie and to not believe him. The family make their way into the courtroom and sit in the section that will be represented by the prosecutor. Everyone's anxious, but also ready to finally come to terms with what actually happened that dreadful Valentine's Day 1 year and 3 weeks ago. But almost everyone in the courtroom is also kind of calm because of one major factor: the judge. Judge Tokusile Masipa. Her standing in the South African judicial system is very much reflected among the common man. She was respected, to say the least. And not only for her ability to understand and practice the law in very tricky and complicated situations, but also for her ability to understand the law in a wise way. The law is like a box. It is rigid, it is cold, not very flexible, and yet the most complex nature of humankind will be interpreted by that box, and therefore also sometimes misinterpreted and misrepresented. Unless you add wisdom to it, then that box can become something that can help us understand human nature when it's showing the worst parts of itself. When it was announced that this case would get Judge Masipa as the sitting judge, the legal teams involved took a deep sigh of relief, and so did the South African society. You know the saying, a mind with no heart is cold and a heart with no mind is chaotic? Judge Masipa was the embodiment of the balance between the heart and the mind, and there lied the wisdom she was known to have. Everyone was convinced that if there is one person that can make sense of the true events of the day in question, it is her. She will be able to bring justice to this case. Justice, either for Reeva or for Oscar. By the end of the trial, the public opinion will do something that is 100% characteristic for it to do. It will change its mind. Judge Masipa will give a ruling that will make the South African people hate her, so much so that she would need to have bodyguards around her at all time. But for now, let's stay in the courtroom on the first day of the trial. Oscar has entered the courtroom and is being asked to stand as Judge Masipa also enters the courtroom. As always, she will be presented with two versions of the actual event. One version will say that it was all a mistake, that Oscar never intended to kill Reeva. He thought it was a burglar he shot. The other version would paint a much darker picture of Oscar. A picture of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. Reeva is dead because Oscar wanted her dead. There was never a mistake. There was only a boyfriend who killed his girlfriend. The judge is now ready to have the two opposing teams make their statements. Let's start with Oscar's version. Right before 8 o'clock on February 13, he comes into his room and he opens the balcony door because it was a very humid evening. He switches on the TV and Reeva does yoga. The balcony door is still open when they go to bed. Oscar was sitting up in bed and Reeva rolled over to him. "Can't you sleep, my Baba?" she asks. "No, I can't," he answers. It's too warm and humid for Oscar. But after a while, he manages to fall asleep, but wakes up in the middle of the night. Without putting his prosthetics on, he goes out to the balcony to get some fans that he stores out there. He is walking on his leg stumps. He comes back into the bedroom and he draws the curtains and it gets dark in the room. That's when he hears a sound coming from the bathroom. It sounds like the window slides open. Oscar thinks it's an intruder that has come in through the bathroom window. So he moves to the bed and reaches for his 9mm pistol that he stores under his bed. On his way to the bathroom, he yells to the intruder to get out of his house, and he tells Reeva to get on the floor and to phone the police. He's walking on his leg stumps towards the bathroom area, and he sees that the window is open. He understands that the intruder is in the toilet because he doesn't see anyone in the bathroom. Then he hears a noise coming from inside the toilet. He perceives that the person hiding in the toilet is about to come out of there. He says, quote, "It filled me with horror and fear of an intruder being inside the toilet. As I did not have my prosthetic legs on and felt extremely vulnerable, I knew I had to protect Reeva and myself. I believed when the intruder come out of the toilet, we would be in grave danger. I felt trapped and had limited mobility on my stumps." End quote. He doesn't think. He simply gets scared and fires 4 shots at the door. He then yells to Reeva to again call the police, but he doesn't get a reply. According to Oscar, this, right here, right now, is the first time it dawns on him that it could be Reeva that was in the toilet. He moves backwards out of the bathroom, keeping his eyes on the bathroom entrance. It's still pitch dark in the bedroom. He reaches the bed and finds it empty. He moves as fast as he can to the toilet door, calling for Reeva. The panic is building up inside of him. He moves to the balcony door, opens it, stands there and shouts for help. Then he gets back inside, finds his prosthetics that are lying on the floor. He puts them on, walks back to the toilet and starts kicking on the door to get it to open. When that doesn't work, he gets a cricket bat and hits the door with it until he broke one of the panels. During this whole time, he is screaming and shouting for Reeva to answer him back, but he never gets a reply. Through the broken panel, he can see Reeva's body slumped over the toilet. She had been hit by 3 of the shots. Now the time has come for the prosecutor to give his version of the events. It's worth mentioning that the prosecutor, whose name is Gary Nell, is called the Pitbull, for good reasons, for the methods he uses interrogating the prosecuted. This is the short version of what the prosecutor says happened. Oscar and Reeva fought that night. That triggered Oscar, who, according to some witnesses, had a problem with his temper. The argument got heated. Actually, the argument got aggressive from Oscar's side. Reeva got scared and felt the need to not be around Oscar when he's like this. So she goes to the bathroom and locks herself in the toilet, thinking that she would be safe there, that she would stay there until Oscar calmed down. But Oscar wouldn't calm down. Instead, Oscar went for his firearm, positioned himself in front of the toilet door and shot 4 times with the intention of killing Reeva. The version Oscar gives, with him thinking it was an intruder he shot, is all a lie, constructed by Oscar to save himself. Point by point, the Pitbull will show the judge why Oscar's version doesn't hold and why he has chosen to prosecute Oscar for premeditated murder and not manslaughter. Among many points, the prosecutor would put forth 5 very important ones to show the intent of premeditated murder. To each one of his points, the defense team would bring forth alternative explanations, trying to create reasonable doubt. Let's go through them one by one. This is the prosecutor's first point. Oscar lives in a gated community where all possible measures has been taken to keep criminals, and more specifically, burglars, away, to make it close to impossible for them to enter that area. And still, Oscar's first thought isn't that the person making the noise from the bathroom is Reeva, but a burglar. That doesn't make any sense. There was no burglar and Oscar knew it. One of the strongest points the defense team is bringing forth to the judge is how vulnerable and exposed Oscar felt because of his disability, because at the night in question, Oscar was walking on his leg stumps. To prove this point, Oscar agrees to walk in the courtroom without his prosthetics on, walking on his bare leg stumps to show how small he is without his aid. He is 5'2", or 1.6 meters tall on his bare stumps. The investigation would also prove, using the position of the bullet holes in the toilet door, that Oscar wasn't wearing his prosthetics. This is a strong point from the defense, because this explained why Oscar was so quick to react, so quick to take out his gun, and so quick to shoot. That was because of his inferior position, and because he wasn't only protecting himself from what he believed was an intruder that was stronger than him, but that he was also trying to protect Reeva. The second point, witnesses. The neighbors had heard Oscar and Reeva fight, and there were even neighbors that had heard a woman scream between the shots being fired. One neighbor would testify in court saying, quote, "Right before I heard the shots, I heard a woman scream," end quote. However, it is also worth noting that there are other neighbors that testified hearing something else, things that actually supports Oscar's version. There were neighbors that heard no screams whatsoever and that only had heard the fire shots. The third point. How is it even possible for Oscar to miss the detail that Reeva was not lying in bed? Reeva wasn't lying in bed. She was in the bathroom scared for her life. The defense team simply states that from Oscar's position and how the bed cover was positioned, that he had thought that Reeva was lying in bed. The fourth point. Why was the toilet door locked? If Reeva had woken up in the middle of the night to simply go to the toilet, and there was no other person there than Oscar, then why lock the door? Well, according to the prosecutor, she had locked the door because she was afraid. The defense team stated, "That's what you do out of habit. That's how simple it is." The fifth point. Why didn't Reeva answer him back that she was in the toilet? He yelled out to Reeva to get down on the floor and call the police. Surely Reeva would at least have heard that Oscar is speaking, even if she was in the toilet. It is plausible to assume that Reeva would have replied, said something, or at least asked who he is talking to. Of course, the defense team would say that Reeva didn't hear him. When pictures are shown in the courtroom of Reeva's body, Oscar reacts very strongly, both emotionally and physically, and he throws up. When Oscar is on the stand, the prosecutor pulls out the same pictures that have made Oscar throw up. Oscar asks the prosecutor not to show him the pictures, saying, "I was there that night. I don't need to see those pictures." The prosecutor immediately fires back, saying, "You don't want to look at them because you don't want to take responsibility for what you did to her." Oscar strongly fights back at this claim, saying, "I take responsibility, but I will not look at a picture where I'm tormented by what I saw and felt that night. As I picked Reeva up, my fingers touched her head. I remember. I don't have to look at a picture. I was there." Oscar can barely get the words out as he is crying. At another point, when he is cross-examined by the prosecutor, he is crying so hard that he can barely answer the questions. The prosecutor looks at Oscar with a face saying, "I don't buy this act." And he asks Oscar, "You're only crying this hard to avoid answering questions that you know would make you look guilty, aren't you, Mr. Pistorius?" Judge Masipa interrupts the prosecutor, asking, "What do you mean by that?" Mr. Pistorius has been crying non-stop ever since he entered this courtroom. Then saying to Oscar, "You don't have to answer that question." Oscar would be cross-examined for 5 days. Both the prosecutor and the defense team dug into the relationship between Oscar and Reeva. One side to prove that Oscar was a loving and caring person, and the other proving that Reeva was scared of him. They each used text messages to prove their points. 1,700 messages had been sent between them during the 3 months they knew each other. Out of all these messages, only 4 conversations were argumentative. Oscar's defense lawyer, Mr. Ru, would state, there was disagreements, but if you look at the messages, they were solved quickly. The prosecutor would show one of these disagreements where Reeva in her texts would tell Oscar, quote, I'm scared of you sometimes, of how you snap at me, unquote. In those text messages, she would describe his behavior as nasty. On February 13th, just a few hours before she was shot, Reeva sent Oscar a text saying, you are an amazing person with so many blessings, and you are more than cared for. When Oscar was on the stand, he would be handed the Valentine's card Reeva had written to him. He was asked to open and read it out loud. In the card, Reeva had written, I think today is a good day to tell you that I love you. Before the trial ends, Oscar wants to apologize to Reeva's family, saying, quote, there hasn't been a moment since this tragedy happened that I haven't thought about you, her family. I wake up every morning and you're the first people I think of, the first people I pray for. I can't imagine the pain and sorrow I've caused you. I was simply trying to protect Reeva. Unquote. Chapter 4. The Verdict. This is the moment the whole world has been waiting for. Which is it? Did Oscar truly mistake Reeva for a burglar? Or was this a case of domestic abuse where a man killed his partner? Judge Masipa looks down at her papers, takes a deep breath, and reads the verdict. Quote, the state clearly has not proved beyond reasonable doubt that the accused is guilty of premeditated murder. There are just not enough facts to support such a finding. Unquote. Oscar is crying from relief when he hears this statement, but the continuation of his sentence isn't read to him until the following day. The next day, Oscar seems gathered and calm. He is looking straight ahead of him when he is asked to stand up while the judge is reading his sentence. Judge Masipa continues, quote, the unanimous decision of this court is the following. He is found guilty of culpable homicide, unquote. Culpable homicide is a South African judicial term that can be understood as something between causing the death of another and manslaughter. Judge Masipa says to Oscar that he should have known shooting 4 shots, that they could be lethal. But she also took into consideration the fact that Oscar immediately tried to revive Reeva and called for help. The prosecutor is asking for a minimum of 10 years in prison, but Judge Masipa decides that the sentence will be 5 years in prison. In South Africa, if your sentence is 5 years, you could come out after 10 months on good behavior. And that is what happens. Oscar is out on parole after 10 months in prison and he is in house arrest. The prosecutor appeals the sentence, saying that Oscar has gotten off lightly, that you should never be allowed to shoot someone from such a short distance without having seen who that person is. So the case is taken up in the Supreme Court, and this time it takes a complete new turn. This time, Oscar Pistorius is considered guilty of murdering Reeva Steenkamp, and his sentence sharpens to 6 years. The prosecutor is not happy with the length of the sentence and appeals it once again. This time, Oscar is sentenced to 13 years and 5 months in prison. He is transferred from house arrest back to prison. Oscar tries to appeal the sentence, but his appeal is rejected by court. In November 2023, a parole board agrees Oscar should be released, and in January 2024, he is freed from prison under strict parole conditions, meaning he will be in house arrest until 2029. He is prohibited from drinking alcohol and giving interviews on the matter, and will be in court-ordered therapy. Reeva Steenkamp was born on August 19, 1983. She was a law student with both big hopes and plans for her career. She was also a model and a reality TV star. She only got to live for 29 years. She had her whole life in front of her, a life she deserved to have lived. She is deeply missed by her friends and family, and the South African judicial system gave her justice when she couldn't. All we can hope for now is that she's resting in peace. Thank you for listening. I will see you in the next story.